The alien princess made fun of the human warrior. Her mother stopped her and said, "He is your father." The ceiling of the grand celestial hall shimmered with refracted starlight, an architectural miracle that bent nearby nebulae into an ever-changing canvas of cosmic art. Beneath it, 1,000 aristocrats in hovering robes and photosynthetic headpieces stood in ceremonial order, their eyes fixed on the center aisle. Princess SciFi, her silver hair braided into twin spirals down her back, shifted in her throne of obsidian glass and let out a sigh loud enough to be picked up by 3 diplomatic microphones and 1 very nosy beetle drone. Another boring court assembly, another diplomatic formality. She glanced over at her mother, Queen Girana, who was reclined slightly on her throne, like someone pretending to enjoy a very slow opera. SciFi poked at her neural interface to check the time, and was dismayed to find that only 6 minutes had passed since the proceedings began. She tapped in a quick note to herself. Invent time-accelerating socks. Patent before midday. The court announcer, a sentient crystal with a voice like a clarinet drowning in honey, cleared its throat. Presenting from the Terran sovereign frontier, Elias Vorn of Earth, former commander of the Interstellar Resistance, diplomatic guest, record holder of 96 confirmed tactical victories, 1 interspecies chess championship, and the unfortunate incident with the Regulan ambassador's hot tub. SciFi blinked. The hall doors parted with a hiss of vacuum seals. In strode a man who looked like a walking contradiction. He wore an outdated combat jacket, patched with faded insignias and 1 suspiciously hand-sewn banana. His left leg had a slight metallic clunk with every step, and a jagged scar ran from his temple to just under his right eye, an eye that glowed faintly green, cybernetic and twitchy. He walked like gravity owed him an apology, and confidence had never met a mirror. SciFi leaned toward her mother's ear. He looks like someone who eats protein paste straight from the tube. Shh, said Queen Girana. He's not even symmetrical. And why is he carrying a lunchbox? The lunchbox, as it turned out, was a tactical satchel designed for planetary assault, retrofitted to hold snacks and emergency socks. Elias stopped at the center of the hall, looked up and squinted at the star-painted ceiling. Well, he muttered, his voice gritty like an old hover truck engine. Nice chandelier. A few nobles gasped in horror. 1 fainted into a decorative koi fountain. SciFi couldn't help herself. She stood, her long ears twitching ever so slightly in derision. He can't even speak our tongue. Look at him. What species of mushroom did we pull this relic from? The nobles chuckled nervously. Elias tilted his head, glanced up at the queen, then back at SciFi. Charmed, I'm sure, he said in perfect Zelfirian, though with a farmer's accent from the asteroid belt. That took a few of them aback. SciFi raised an eyebrow, undeterred. Was that a dialect or a medical condition? The laugh this time was less nervous, more genuine. Girana's fingers clenched the edge of her throne. I mean, SciFi went on, gesturing vaguely toward Elias, he's got the fashion sense of a garbage scout and the posture of a malfunctioning butler droid. You're not seriously presenting this as a guest of honor? Girana stood. The room froze. Every fluttering gown, every shimmering cape, even the koi in the fountain, everything stopped. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was the voice of a woman who had spoken through the vacuum of space, through plasma storms, through the roar of collapsing wormholes. He is your father. Silence, absolute and soul-splitting, followed. SciFi's expression didn't change at first. It was as if the meaning of the sentence had to travel through multiple layers of disbelief before arriving at her brain's central command station. Her mouth remained half open, as though mid-joke, but the punchline had been surgically removed. Then she blinked. Once. Twice. What? She croaked. Elias rubbed the back of his neck. Surprise? SciFi looked from him to her mother and back again. Her voice rose a full octave. You bred with a human? There was a gasp from somewhere in the diplomatic section. A Zelfirian scribe dropped their stylus, which clattered dramatically across the marble floor. Girana remained composed, though there was a flicker of amusement in her violet eyes. I also shared a trench with one, rescued him from pirates, and watched him shoot down 3 enemy ships with a frying pan. Sailevi looked physically ill. And then you decided to mix genetics with him? It was a very long war, Girana said, almost wistfully. Ilias raised a finger. For the record, it wasn't just the frying pan. I also saved her from a collapsing cave system and gave her a foot massage once that. No, said Sailevi, voice brittle. No, 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 no. I did say we'd tell her eventually, Elias added. I was going to wait until she turned 60, said Girana. I'm 24. Exactly. Sailevi clutched her head like it was full of wasps. This can't be real. There's no way. He's just, look at him. I am looking, said the queen with a grin. And you, Sailevi pointed at Elias like she was casting a spell. You just show up here, dragging your lunchbox, grinning like a malfunctioning dogbot, and expect me to believe, what, that you're some forgotten war hero? That you slept with a queen and forgot to send a postcard? Elias nodded slowly. In my defense, interstellar mail was unreliable back then, and also I may have crash-landed into a dimension that was 90% lava for several months. Kinda distracted me. The princess stumbled back a step, her heel caught on the edge of the dais. She tottered, arms pinwheeling. Elias darted forward and caught her just before she hit the floor. Gotcha. For a moment, they stared at each other, frozen. Sailevi's eyes narrowed. Let go of me. Yup. He straightened, hands up in surrender. Definitely your daughter. She stormed out of the hall, cape flaring, muttering ancient Zelfirian curses under her breath. The court, still in stunned silence, watched her vanish. Elias turned to the queen. Well, he said, I'd call that a solid 6 out of 10 on the family reunion scale. Could have been worse. No one got stabbed, yet. Girana allowed herself a slow, indulgent smile. The day is still young. The infirmary ceiling hummed softly, projecting calming star fields across its domed surface, while low-frequency tones vibrated at scientifically calibrated intervals, designed to soothe the nerves of even the most cantankerous royal. None of it worked on Sailevi. She sat bolt upright on the edge of the hoverbed, arms folded, eyes narrowed to plasma cutter slits. An empathetic med drone hovered beside her, offering tea, calming mist, or a sedative. She swatted it away like it was a fly that had dared insult her lineage. He can't be my father, she muttered to herself for the 6th time in 10 minutes. It's physically, emotionally, and aesthetically impossible. Girana, who had entered the room in time to hear that line, raised an eyebrow. He's got your stubbornness. He's got the gait of a broken vending machine. The queen ignored that. We ran a DNA confirmation, if you'd like to review it. 2 independent scans. Perfect match. Sailevi snatched the crystalline data tablet from her mother's hand, skimmed the results, and nearly threw it across the room before remembering it was worth more than a small moon. Well, maybe you tampered with it. Girana's face didn't change, but her left ear twitched, the royal equivalent of an eye roll. I don't tamper. I conquer, seduce, and occasionally co-parent. You seduce that? It was wartime. Your standards shift when your escape pod's air recycler is broken and your rescuer makes a decent stew. Sailevi buried her face in her hands and groaned like a collapsing singularity. I can't unhear that. I'm going to need neural bleach. Girana sat beside her, posture relaxed. Look at it this way. You spent years asking me about your father. Well, here he is. A bit older, a bit rustier, but more or less intact. You should talk to him. I'd rather eat a live gravworm. Gravworms are rich in protein. Sailevi glared. That was not an invitation. Meanwhile, in the royal gardens, Elias was engaged in conversation with a sentient flower. It was unclear whether he knew the flower was sentient or if he was just talking to plants because no one else wanted to talk to him. You ever feel like you've walked into the wrong timeline? He asked the flower. It emitted a soft chime and leaned slightly left, possibly in sympathy. Yeah, same here. I mean, I show up expecting awkward small talk, maybe a handshake or two, and instead my daughter greets me like I'm a fungus growing on her wedding cake. The flower released a cloud of bioluminescent pollen. Elias sniffed and immediately sneezed hard enough to knock over a decorative pillar. Okay, note to self. Zelfirian flora do not like jokes. A gardener bot whirred over, tutted in 6 languages, and began reassembling the pillar with magnetic bolts and visible disdain. Back inside, Sylvie was now pacing the infirmary like a cat forced into formal wear. "You didn't think to tell me?" Girana shrugged. "You had exams." "I was 12. They were very important exams. Math. Calculating orbital trajectories is crucial to statecraft." Sylvie groaned again, then pointed an accusing finger. "What about his name? Elias Vorn? It sounds like a kitchen appliance." "I think it's heroic, or at least aggressively practical." "And his face, it's like someone tried to sculpt a man out of leftover asteroid rock." "He looked better without the beard." "He had a beard?" "A very nice one." Sylvie made a strangled noise somewhere between a shriek and a sneeze. Then she marched out, nearly knocking over a hovering tray of alien fruit. "I'm getting a 3rd DNA test. Don't forget to hydrate," Girana called after her. Down in the palace archives, Sylvie waved her royal credentials with something bordering on violent enthusiasm. The archivist, a semi-retired AI that wore a monocle for dramatic effect, scanned her ID and opened the ancestry records. "I want the most detailed breakdown possible," she said. "Chromosomal, mitochondrial, quantum echo resonance, all of it." "Would you like the dramatized version?" the AI offered. "There's a musical score." Just the facts. The results materialized page by page, detailing every nanoscopic match between her and the man currently befriending a tree. She tried to find an anomaly, an error, a data hiccup. Nothing. The AI added helpfully, "If it helps, your paternal line has a rich history of heroic self-destruction, impulsive marriage proposals, and one incident involving a bear with laser eyes." Sylvie didn't respond. She stared at the page. Outside, Elias was trying to figure out the controls of a hover kitchen. He pressed a button. It sprouted legs. He pressed another. It launched 3 pancakes at terminal velocity. "Oh no," he muttered as one embedded itself in the side of a nearby statue. A court servant rounded the corner and gaped. "What are you doing?" "Testing gravitational vector resistance." "On the art?" Elias squinted. "Was that art?" "Thought it was a war memorial." "It's you." Elias turned to look at the statue, now adorned with a syrupy pancake on its left eye. "Huh, I had more hair back then." Sylvie returned to the scene just in time to witness her father licking syrup off a priceless relic of interstellar unity. She stopped, stared, and slowly turned back toward the hallway. "Nope," she whispered to herself. "I'm living in a holodrama." "Hey," Elias called. "You want breakfast?" "You're the reason I have trust issues." Elias sighed and pulled the pancake off the statue. "She gets that from her mother." Later that evening, in the royal dining hall, Girana, Elias, and Sylvie sat in what could only be described as the universe's most awkward meal. The room was silent, save for the hum of anti-grav chandeliers and the occasional metallic crunch from Elias's malfunctioning leg brace. Sylvie pushed her food around with a glowing fork. "So, war hero, huh?" "Sometimes. Other times, war idiot." "Explains the fashion sense." "I like this jacket. It has pockets. It has holes. Ventilation." Girana sipped her drink, utterly serene. Sylvie stared at Elias, squinting. "Why'd you leave?" He looked up from his plate. "Your mom told me to run. Said she'd handle the aftermath, the court, the politics. I was a soldier, not a statesman. And," he hesitated, "I thought she was safer without me." Sylvie didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You really fought with a frying pan?" "It was titanium and preheated." A reluctant smirk tugged at her lips. "Progress. Microscopic, molecular, but progress." Elias raised a cup. "To awkward dinners." Sylvie clinked hers half-heartedly. "To hereditary trauma." Girana toasted them both. "To family." The Royal Star Cruiser Varelian purred softly as it drifted through the upper atmosphere of Zelpher Prime, cruising low over cloud jungles, the color of bruised blue and flame orange. Inside its observation deck, Sylvie stood beside a crystalline viewport, arms folded, ears twitching in small, involuntary spasms. She wasn't angry anymore, not exactly. More perplexed, off balance. like someone who expected the floor to tilt one way and instead found themselves stumbling into a wall with a commemorative plaque on it. Behind her, Elias was trying to figure out how to sit in a floating chair that adjusted itself every time he moved. "I think this chair hates me," he muttered, shifting again as it retracted under him like a confused jellyfish. "Is this a cultural thing?" Sylvie didn't turn. "It responds to neural sync patterns. Yours are probably out of calibration. It just called me a squishy old mammal in binary." "You are. I prefer vintage." She rolled her eyes but said nothing. Elias finally managed to sit without floating into the ceiling. The chair hummed suspiciously beneath him. "So? Field mission, huh?" He gestured at the star cruiser around them. "You and me, saving a diplomatic envoy from a mining moon. Just like old times. Except I wasn't invited to the first times." "You weren't even supposed to come on this one," she said without looking back. "Mother insisted. Said it would be bonding." "Ah, yes, nothing bonds a family like pirates, malfunctioning gravity wells, and the very real possibility of diplomatic disaster. She also said if I didn't take you, she'd assign you to teach military history at the academy." Elias winced. Teenagers with laser rifles. Terrifying. Sylvie finally glanced over her shoulder, her expression hovering somewhere between disdain and curiosity. "What exactly did you do during the war, besides allegedly hitting enemies with cookware?" "Well, first of all, it was strategic cookware. Titanium alloy, reinforced handle. Excellent for both breakfast and bludgeoning. Second, I did a lot of sneaking, a lot of improvising, some shooting, and once I disarmed a bomb with a toothpick and a holographic map of downtown Argon 7. "You're making that up." "I absolutely am not. The toothpick was cinnamon-flavored, highly distracting to the bomb." Sylvie snorted despite herself and turned back to the viewport. Below them, the mining colony of Granthalis 3 loomed into view. A pockmarked ball of rock wrapped in scaffolding and mineral collectors, dotted with habitation pods and flickering hazard lights. The place looked like someone had tried to rebuild a city using only spare parts and wishful thinking. Elias tilted forward in his chair. "Cozy. Half the colony is on strike," Sylvie said. "The other half is threatening to sabotage the fusion core, and someone in the diplomatic envoy has gone missing." Sabotage and diplomacy? Finally, a reunion with some flair. The cruiser docked with a dull metallic clunk. As the landing bay hissed open, a blast of recycled, overly dry air hit them in the face like a slap from a disappointed air conditioner. A reception bot waddled forward, lights blinking erratically. "Welcome to Granthalis 3, it said. "Please do not stand near railings, consume the groundwater, or antagonize the resident megafauna." "Resident what?" Elias asked. The bot sputtered. "We don't like to talk about it." They followed a flickering corridor to the central command tower, where Administrator Keelan, a wiry man with 3 sets of eyebrows and a permanent twitch, greeted them with all the enthusiasm of someone who had just been asked to babysit an explosive ferret. "You're late," Keelan said. "You're twitchy," Elias replied. "We all have burdens." Keelan blinked 3 times, not in unison. "Are you the father?" "I'm a father," Elias said cheerfully. "Whether I'm the father depends on the day." Keelan looked at Sylvie for help. She offered none. They were escorted to the command deck, where blinking red lights pulsed like anxious fireflies. A wall-sized monitor showed a schematic of the colony. Several critical systems were highlighted in orange or red, including life support, fusion core integrity, and something labeled Ice Cream Protocol Beta. Sylvie frowned. "Why is dessert part of your emergency systems?" Keelan scowled. "Morale." "Fair." Elias pointed at the blinking red dot near Sector D. "That where your missing envoy was last seen?" "Yes. Diplomat Thren. Went to negotiate with the striking miners. Never came back. We sent a scout drone. It got vaporized by a plasma welder and a very angry poem." "Poetry?" Elias asked. "Militant verse. Rhymed threats. Couple of limericks. It was very aggressive." Sylvie exhaled slowly. "All right. We'll go in. Try not to let the colony explode while we're gone." "I make no promises." They suited up in pressure gear. light, flexible, and only mildly itchy, and made their way into the lower levels of the colony. The hallways there were darker, grimmier, filled with the distant thump of machinery and the occasional muttered threat written in glowing graffiti. Most of it rhymed. Badly. Elias read one aloud. If management sends down more lies, we'll launch their socks into the skies. Creative. SciFi activated her helmet comms. Try not to engage with them unless absolutely necessary. Define absolutely necessary. Impending death. Right. So just moderate violence is okay? They found the diplomat tied to a pipe in Sector D, surrounded by grumpy miners wielding tools and megaphones. Elias stepped forward, arms raised. Hello, fellow disgruntled beings. I bring a message of peace, sarcasm, and possibly snacks. The leader, a miner with arms the size of speeder bikes and a beard made of braided cable ties, pointed a wrench at them. State your allegiance, Elias leaned in conspiratorially. To the cause of not dying horribly in a fusion core meltdown? There was a pause. The miner shrugged. Fair. SciFi handled the actual diplomacy. It was impressive, eloquent, firm, laced with just enough threat to suggest orbital strikes without actually promising them. Elias mostly stood beside her, nodding solemnly and occasionally handing out ration bars. They negotiated a temporary truce, untied the diplomat, and narrowly avoided being crushed by a falling coolant pipe on the way out. Elias caught it with one arm, grunted, and said, Still got it. Define it, SciFi said, hauling the diplomat along. Reckless charm. More like reckless spine. As they exited the sector, the walls behind them shook with the distant sound of megafauna grumbling. Do we need to worry about that? Elias asked. Only if it gets hungry. Back aboard the Virelion, they peeled out of their gear and slumped into debrief chairs. SciFi's hair had curled from the humidity. Elias had a new burn mark on his sleeve and a suspicious smear of pink slime on his boot. He looked over at her, raising an eyebrow. Not bad for a human fungus, huh? She rolled her eyes but allowed the corner of her mouth to lift, just barely. Don't get cocky, she said. Too late, he replied. It's a family trait. There were exactly 3 things Elias Vorn feared in life: automated dental procedures, tax auditors from Rigel 12, and state dinners hosted by the Royal Zelfirian Court. At least with the first 2, he could feign death or claim a rare allergic reaction. But tonight he was stuck in a tunic that itched in 11 dimensions, seated at a table so long it required subspace relays just to pass the salt, next to his daughter, who hadn't spoken to him in 47 minutes and counting. Across the table, a Glarnik ambassador with translucent skin and a voice like weeping glass was explaining something about mineral tariffs, occasionally punctuated by wet, blinking sounds that made Elias lose his appetite. Not that he'd had much to begin with. The appetizer had tried to crawl off his plate when he stabbed it with his fork. SciFi, by contrast, looked like she belonged. Regal. Poised. Ears curved with subtle disdain. She leaned toward him at one point, just enough to whisper, If you spill anything tonight, I'm going to tell the entire room that you invented finger-eating on your home planet. I did invent finger-eating, he whispered back. How else do you explain sandwiches? Her expression did not shift, but her right ear gave a tiny, involuntary twitch. Progress. Girona presided over the dinner with the ease of someone who knew how to silence an entire room with a single raised eyebrow. She sat flanked by dignitaries from half a dozen systems, including one insectoid diplomat who refused to stop clicking during the soup course, and a floating orb named Glorf who communicated through color pulses and passive-aggressive vibrations. When the 5th course was served, something gelatinous that smelled faintly like cinnamon and despair, Elias leaned sideways again. You ever wonder how this became your normal? SciFi didn't look at him. You mean politics, galactic negotiations, or being related to you? All 3. She sipped her drink in lieu of a response. Elias took that as a victory. By the time dessert arrived in the form of a levitating cake that recited poetry about itself, Elias had started to mentally calculate the odds of surviving an escape pod ejection mid-banquet. Not good, but still better than listening to Glorf's rendition of Ode to Fiscal Responsibility. Just when he thought things couldn't get weirder, The palace AI interrupted with an urgent chime that echoed across the chamber. "Apologies, your majesties," it intoned, "but there has been a breach in the vault sector." Girana stood instantly. "Show me!" A shimmering image appeared midair, showing a group of masked intruders in stealth suits, worming through laser grids and bypassing retinal scanners with a device that looked suspiciously like a repurposed smoothie blender. Scifistory stood as well, her hand already on her plasma blade. Are they singing?" Indeed, the intruders appeared to be humming a jaunty tune as they looted artifacts from the royal vault. One of them twirled. "Who breaks into a palace while dancing?" Elias asked. "Someone very confident," Scifistory muttered. "Or very stupid." "Could be both," Elias said, already rolling up his sleeves. "Let's go find out." They followed the queen through the palace corridors as royal guards assembled with dignified urgency. Dignified in this case meaning they didn't trip over their own plasma rifles. The security hub was chaos, with alerts flashing in multiple languages and a technician sobbing quietly in the corner after accidentally triggering the palace's anti-rudeness protocol, which had electroshocked him for raising his voice at a monitor. Elias examined the feed. "Thereafter the historian crystal?" Girana nodded grimly. "It contains centuries of Zelfirian memory strands, cultural DNA, every monarch's thoughts, hopes, and occasional scandals." "Scandals, you say?" Elias mused. "Stay focused," Scifistory snapped. They tracked the intruders to Vault Hall 6, where the security door was already halfway open and the crystal hovered inside its containment field. Humming faintly, one of the thieves stood poised to grab it until a thrown boot smacked him square in the helmet. "Was that your boot?" Scifistory asked, stunned. "Improvisation," Elias said, hopping on one foot. "We used to call that a Vorn distraction." A firefight broke out immediately. The thieves were quick, but so were Scifistory's reflexes. Her blade carved through the air in arcs of glowing violet, while Elias took cover behind a statue of himself and lobbed what appeared to be highly compressed jelly snacks as makeshift grenades. "You brought snacks to a battle?" Scifistory shouted between parries. "Multi-use nutrition," Elias grinned. "Also, they explode. Just a little." As one of the thieves vaulted over a display case, Elias tackled him midair. They crashed into a pile of ceremonial cushions, where Elias promptly wedged the intruder with a sash of royal merit. "Never underestimate textile-based warfare," he wheezed. By the time the last thief fled through an emergency chute with a singed rear and a trail of glitter, long story, the crystal was safe if slightly askew in its casing. Girana stepped forward, adjusted it delicately, and turned to the others. "Well done." Scifistory sheathed her blade. "We need to figure out who sent them." Elias poked at the jelly snack remains. "Anyone with bad taste in music and worse taste in tactics." "Which narrows it down to everyone in the outer fringe," Scifistory said. Girana gave them both a look. "Debrief in the strategy chamber, and someone find this man a second boot." Back in the chamber, Scifistory paced while Elias sat with one foot wrapped in borrowed gauze and the other in a sandal labeled "Property of Palace Spa." "I think they were professionals," Scifistory said, "disguised as amateurs. The choreography was too precise." Elias nodded. "And the humming, definitely rehearsed, like bad theater. Meaning we're not just dealing with thieves," she added, "we're dealing with performers." "That," Elias said, "is somehow worse." They worked late into the night with the AI compiling data, analyzing choreography for pattern recognition, and occasionally auto-tuning the humming for morale. By morning, they had a list of suspects, a working theory, and a very grumpy ambassador still stuck at the banquet table. Elias stretched and glanced at Scifistory. "So, another day, another high-stakes cultural crisis. You get used to it." He hesitated. "You know, you didn't have to fight next to me. You could have ordered me to stay back." "I could have," she said, "but then you would have done something stupid on your own. This way I can minimize the fallout." "Oh," Elias grinned, "you do care." "I care about not having to clean up your mess." "Same thing, really." She didn't smile, not exactly, but her eyes didn't narrow with contempt this time, and her next sentence was almost tolerable. "Try not to lose any more footwear," she said. I'll try, he replied. No promises. And for the first time since arriving, she didn't threaten to exile him for saying that. Elias woke up face first in a holographic map of the Zelfirian star cluster, blinking as the map's interactive surface repeatedly tried to project a star into his left nostril. The AI politely suggested he relocate before it recalibrated his cranial coordinates. He grunted, rolled sideways, and found himself tangled in a strategy shawl someone had left on the console overnight. It smelled faintly of citrus and extremely faintly of ego. I see sleeping on critical infrastructure is still a tactical choice, Seleve said dryly from across the chamber, where she was mid-conversation with an orb-shaped advisor named Hexel. The orb rotated in the air slowly, blinking lavender in approval at her strategic overview. Elias gave it a thumbs up. It turned orange. Possibly offense, possibly confusion. I was meditating, Elias said, untangling himself. Deep war mind trance. You wouldn't understand. War mind trances don't snore. That's called acoustic camouflage. Seleve gestured at the display behind her, where footage of the break-in had been replaying in endless loops. The analysis came back. Their movement sequences match a group called the Synesthetic Choir, performance anarchists, art terrorism, flash revolutions, interpretive rebellion. Mostly harmless, except when they steal memory crystals. They don't usually go for hard assets. Their whole thing is disrupting symbolic systems. They once rewired a planetary anthem to make every line end in cheese. It caused a constitutional crisis. That explains the dancing, Elias muttered, rubbing his temples. We're being punked by militant space theater kids. They're funded, Seleve said. Equipped. Someone's backing them. The queen entered then, her robes flickering subtly with diplomatic urgency, followed by Minister Kryn, who wore a scowl so sharp it could carve diplomatic immunity into marble. We've intercepted a message, Girona said without preamble. The choir plans another performance, this time in orbit around Othari Prime. They're going to project the stolen thoughts of the ancient monarchs in, quote, a recontextualized cultural scream. Elias blinked. Is that illegal? It's rude, Kryn muttered, and potentially destabilizing. They'll be using the mind fragments from the crystal, Girona added, distorting ancestral memory into propaganda. And poetry, probably, Elias said. Don't forget the rhyming. A mission was assembled quickly. Seleve was put in command, of course, and Elias was, somehow, not excluded. You'll be disguised, she informed him. If they see a royal ship, they scatter. We'll go in low profile. Disguised as what? He asked. 2 hours later, he was boarding a refurbished cargo freighter called the Sprung Gizzard, which smelled like oil, dried kelp, and half regret. He wore coveralls. Seleve wore a scowl. This was the only ship available? Elias asked as he stepped over a leaking conduit that groaned when touched. Most of our stealth fleet is undergoing maintenance, she said, and the choir hacked our military booking system last week. They replaced all ship names with bad limericks. Elias checked the navigation console. The interface was sticky, possibly from jam. Pilot's name is Krint, Seleve added. Retired, mostly sober. Don't antagonize him. Krint emerged from behind a pile of crates, squinting. His left eye was cybernetic, his right eye was a monocle, and neither seemed particularly focused. I don't do politics, he rasped, or hugging, or songs about planets. Understood, Elias said. They departed in a shudder of poorly timed thrusters. The gizzard limped into hyperspace like a reluctant bantha, wobbling slightly as the gravity regulator sang in an off-key hum. En route to Othari Prime, Seleve ran simulations and Elias ate something called a protein wedge that tasted like ambition and old socks. He tried to start a conversation twice, but she shut him down with curt nods and one sentence that began with, if you keep talking, and ended with, I'll relocate you to the vacuum module. Eventually they reached orbit and found the choir's ship, a gleaming, spiraling construct of light panels, organic matter, and musical architecture. It floated above the planet like a chandelier built by sentient lasers. They were broadcasting audio poetry into the stratosphere already. The voiceover was a dramatic reading of Queen Velithra's private love letters, now set to bass-heavy techno. Sylvie winced. That's a war crime. Krint kept them cloaked while Elias suited up. They were going in as tech vendors, posing as an obscure audio enhancement firm. Elias wore a jacket with Bass Boost Zed Galactic printed across the back in neon letters. Sylvie wore mirrored shades and a deeply reluctant expression. They boarded the choir's vessel via an open docking invitation. The choir was very big on transparency, even when it was stupid. Inside, the ship pulsed with beat-synced light and smell emitters. Everything smelled vaguely like overripe fruit and nostalgia. A figure greeted them, floating inches off the floor. Welcome to the vessel art vomit. May your ego be shattered and your truth made kaleidoscopic. Thank you, Elias said solemnly. I brought samples. He handed over a datapad filled with actual bass enhancement code, which he downloaded from a fringe audiophile forum during their last jump. The choir member, named Vin, immediately loaded it into the ship's core. The frequencies are disruptive. They offend me. I love it. While Vin raved about new wave distortion theory, Sylvie snuck toward the broadcast core. She paused at the threshold and messaged Elias through their neural comlink. The crystal's here, being processed. Can we shut it down? Elias responded, while pretending to adjust an imaginary bass dial. Not directly. Too many backup nodes. But I can feed a counterstream. I need noise, feedback. Something that ruins the aesthetic. Elias grinned. Say no more. He stepped up to the main stage, where a performance was about to begin. A live remix of King Jailor's internal monologue, rendered in yodels. Elias snatched the mic before the music dropped. Ladies, gentlefolk, and unaligned beings of the post-sensory diaspora, can I get a vibe check? The room responded with tentative clapping. One individual released confetti spores. Elias grinned wider. Let me tell you about real expression. Let me tell you about dental regret, about planetary taxes, about love lost in the orbit of a sock drawer. Let me tell you, he paused dramatically, the tale of the forgotten spatula. Then he launched into the worst spoken word performance in galactic memory. It was loud, it was long, it contained 3 separate interpretive belch solos. By the second verse, Sylvie had infiltrated the core and begun reversing the stream. The memory crystal's distortions began to fold back on themselves. Vin started sobbing. It's hideous. I see colors that don't exist. The stream crashed. The lights dimmed. The music stopped mid-wail. Sylvie reappeared at his side. Time to go, she said. They fled back to the gizzard just as the choir began collapsing into an artistic identity crisis. Krint gunned the engines. Elias waved through the window, still holding the mic. Back aboard Zelfirian space, the Queen commended their improvisation, though she suggested Elias never speak in public again. He saluted. Permission to occasionally disrupt the galactic arts? Denied, Zorana replied. Sylvie passed him a protein wedge without comment. He took it, grinning. Still hate me? She didn't answer, but she also didn't hit him with the wedge. That was enough. For now. The hallway lights flickered the way they always did before something inconvenient happened. Either a bureaucratic emergency or a surprise inspection from the Imperial Committee for Furniture Stability. Elias hoped for the former. He'd recently leaned too far back in a diplomatic lounge chair, and it still hadn't forgiven him. The AI called it the recliner incident and logged it under minor war crimes. He was halfway through sipping a nutrient paste that claimed to taste like peaches, but mostly reminded him of ancient printer ink when the summons came. Would Representative Elias Vorn please report to Briefing Chamber 7? And please, bring your brain this time. He groaned and dropped the paste into a waste chute, where it hissed ominously. If my brain had unionized, he muttered, it would have taken a permanent holiday by now. When he reached Briefing Chamber 7, he found Sylvie already seated at the table, arms crossed, ears twitching in mild annoyance. A holographic display hovered above the table, cycling through maps, encrypted messages, and the face of a man Elias hoped had been permanently exiled into a sun. Is that? Elias asked. Yes, Sylvie said. General Darsk. Elias swore in 3 human languages, 1 Zelfirian dialect, and what might have been a vegetable-based curse from his childhood. "He's supposed to be dead," Elias said. "He's supposed to be a lot of things," Sylvie replied, "but surveillance picked up this image from a border satellite 2 days ago." The image showed Darsk, unmistakable even under shadow and dust, exiting a ship that bore no identifying marks except a spray-painted diagram of a fork stabbing a book. That was Darsk's new rebel symbol, apparently. He'd always been subtle. "I saw him get spaced," Elias muttered. "Personally." "You saw him almost get spaced," Sylvie corrected. "Apparently he landed on a smuggling freighter during re-entry and convinced them he was a sentient potato-seeking asylum." "That tracks," Elias said. The room dimmed as Girana entered, her expression grave but vaguely exasperated, the expression of someone who dealt with Darsk-related paperwork too many times already. "We believe he's trying to steal the memory strand of the first archive," she said. "It's kept in a vault on Triune Delta. Very ancient, very sacred, and very explosive if improperly handled." "Explosive?" Elias asked. "In the level-less city sense," Girana replied. Sylvie straightened. "We'll need a stealth crew, entry plan, extraction strategy." "You'll also need a librarian," the Queen added. There was a beat. "Why?" Elias asked. "Because the vault requires emotional calibration," Girana said. "You have to feel the history correctly, or it triggers the failsafe. Librarians are emotionally trained." "Feel the history?" Elias blinked. "So we're going into a volatile memory archive with a librarian who cries during book endings?" "Correct," said Girana. The librarian's name was Marrow. He wore glasses even though his vision had been genetically optimized. "For aesthetic," he explained, "and intimidation." He cried 3 times on the shuttle ride to Triune Delta. Once over a poem he'd memorized, once while watching the stars, and once when he accidentally stepped on his own bookmark. Elias tried to bond with him over action holoserials. Marrow said he found them aggressively two-dimensional. They landed just outside the archive, a pyramidal structure humming with deep-time energy. Sylvie handled perimeter defense. Elias handled complaints from Marrow about the dust. The entrance required them to speak a truth they'd never told anyone. Sylvie went first. "I once sabotaged a rival speech generator to replace every noun with bucket." The door clicked. She stepped through. Elias went next. "I lied to my therapist. I do have nightmares about losing sock pairs in space." Click. "Entry granted." Marrow whispered, "I preferred the prequel to the classic trilogy." There was a pause, then a deep mechanical sigh. The door opened. Inside, the archive was vast and humming, filled with shelves that hovered midair, rearranging themselves depending on mood. Marrow guided them toward the central vault while quoting ancient wisdom and occasionally giving the walls compliments. They reached the vault just in time to see Darsk's crew breaching the outer security ring. He led them personally, still wearing that smug look like he'd invented betrayal. "Elias," Darsk said, spotting him. "I thought you died, or grew up." "I tried both," Elias said. "Didn't take." Darsk raised a plasma lance. "You're not stopping me. The truth inside that crystal belongs to everyone, even if I have to broadcast it through a megaphone on every moon." "It'll blow you up," Elias said. "Worth it." Sylvie was already moving, drawing her blade and slicing through 2 of Darsk's men before they could unclip their harnesses. Elias went low, using a technique he'd invented in a bar fight. He called it the sudden knee philosophy. It wasn't elegant, but it dropped one of the rebels like a sack of annoyed cats. Marrow, meanwhile, stood in front of the vault, arms wide. "You will not desecrate this place," he said, voice quivering. "I will recite all 12 volumes of emotional weight in a post-binary civilization if I must." Darsk paused. "You're bluffing." Marrow took a breath. Okay. Darsk threw up his hands. "No need for the monologue of sorrows. I yield." The security field re-engaged. The memory crystal pulsed quietly. The archive returned to calm. Later, as guards escorted Darsk and his crew away, Elias leaned against a wall, breathing hard. "That librarian's a weapon. He's a national treasure," Sylvie said. Marrow adjusted his glasses. "I'm also available for readings at weddings." On the flight back, Elias nudged Sylvie. "You know, I think we make a good team." "I haven't stabbed you yet," she said. "So maybe." "High praise." She rolled her eyes. I'll take it, Elias said. The royal hall smelled like polish, ceremonial incense, and a faint trace of someone's forgotten snack bar tucked under the throne dais. The throne itself, carved from starwood and embedded with microcrystals that shimmered when the queen's mood shifted, currently pulsed a gentle periwinkle, a color that meant cautious optimism or possibly slightly amused by chaos. Elias wasn't sure anymore. The throne had a wider emotional vocabulary than he did. Sylvie stood at her mother's side, her ceremonial armor gleaming under the overhead lights. She kept fidgeting with the clasp, like a girl itching to kick off her shoes after too long pretending to be regal. Her long ears twitched every few seconds. Not irritation, not now. Just the burn of anticipation. Elias stood before them, in clothes that weren't armor or a disguise, just clothes. Soft tunic, neutral tones. He hadn't chosen them. One of the royal attendants had said something about presentable without being diplomatic. He wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a fashion insult. Possibly both. He shifted on his feet. So, he said, do I bow or salute or... Girana smiled faintly. You may breathe, for now. I'm shockingly good at that, he said. Have never exploded once. You came close, Sylvie muttered. He flashed her a grin. But I didn't. You're welcome. Stop flirting in front of the queen, she said, ears reddening just enough to betray her. Girana let out a sound that might have been a sigh or a carefully suppressed chuckle. Enough. The council has convened, and in light of recent events, the matter of your status must be resolved. Elias blinked. My status? You've saved the archive, humiliated the synesthetic choir, and derailed General Darsk's third attempt at civil war. And I made Miro cry tears of joy for the first time in 15 years, Elias added. Girana raised an eyebrow. That too, the council is prepared to recognize your legacy. Legacy feels like a big word for a guy who still doesn't understand half your utensils. You have a child, she said, and Elias felt the word land with surprising weight. A daughter, and a planet that remembers. Sylvie crossed her arms. And possibly a protein wedge named after you in the officer's mess. I've peaked. Girana stepped down from the dais, her voice softening. Elias Vorn, by royal decree, your lineage is acknowledged, not as royalty, but as vital, as real. As history, he didn't know what to say, for once. And, Girana added, your new duties begin immediately. The Exploration Commission has voted unanimously to reinstate the long-range diplomacy program. You'll be leading it. Wait. Elias blinked. You want me to talk to aliens? We are aliens, Sylvie said dryly. Fair point. You have experience navigating volatile personalities, difficult protocols, interspecies cuisine, and unintended explosions. Still a little sensitive about that reactor core, Elias muttered. You're perfect, Girana concluded. He scratched the back of his neck. Can I think about it? Sylvie stepped closer, lowering her voice. I'll be there too. He looked at her, really looked. After everything, she stood taller, not just physically, but with the kind of authority born from facing absurdity and surviving it with humor mostly intact. He nodded. Okay, I'm in, on one condition. Girana raised a brow. I get a new ship, one that doesn't hum Mambo No. 5 during hyperdrive transitions. I make no promises, she said. 2 weeks later, they boarded the Emissary Spark, a mid-sized diplomatic vessel with reinforced hulls, a sarcasm-tolerant AI, and a rec room that played both Zelfirian space jazz and older sitcoms. Elias had a small office, an oversized chair, and a drawer full of reports he planned to ignore until absolutely necessary. Their crew included a rotating team of experts, one unusually sentient plant named Gregor, and Miro, who insisted on coming along to chronicle the emotional tone of intergalactic dialogue. He also brought 10 crates of books and a very picky tea-making drone. Their first mission was to broker a ceasefire between two factions of sentient gas clouds who disagreed about what color their flag should be. Elias nearly suffocated during the negotiations, but ultimately earned a tentative peace by suggesting a flag that changed color every 30 seconds. The clouds called it a triumph of compromise. Marrow cried again. They grew into it, the job, the missions, the meetings, the delicate art of making peace where conflict had taken root. SciFi developed a reputation as the stern one, with sharp ears and sharper words, while Elias became known as the human with 7 backup plans and a joke for every diplomatic stalemate. In quiet hours, they talked. Sometimes about the past, what had happened between Elias and Girana, and how choices had been made not out of cruelty, but fear. Sometimes about the present, like how Elias still couldn't pronounce 3 words in Zelfirian without accidentally swearing, and sometimes about the future. "You're different now," SciFi said once, as they floated in the observation deck, watching a binary star collision unfold in the distance. "I moisturize," Elias replied. She smiled. "You care. You try." "I always tried. Not like this." He turned to her. "You too. You used to hide behind the crown and the sarcasm. And now? Now you hide slightly less." She nudged his shoulder. Progress. And it was, for both of them, slowly in pieces. Trust didn't come all at once. Neither did forgiveness. But it came. In shared missions, awkward breakfasts, and 1,000 half-jokes that turned into full understanding. Elias had never expected to belong anywhere. Not with the humans who forgot him, not with the aliens who never knew him, but here, among stars and arguments, in the presence of a daughter who challenged him daily and a queen who gave him a second chance. He did. They left a trail of peace treaties and confused rebels in their wake. Sometimes they returned to the palace, sometimes to Earth, sometimes just to drift, between calls to rest and look at things bigger than themselves. He never stopped carrying his old scars, but they stopped being heavy. At night when the ship was quiet and Gregor the plant was humming lullabies, Elias would look out the viewport, sip tea Marrow insisted was essential to empathy, and think, maybe this is what legacy really is. Not medals or monuments, but a life lived well, beside people who see you clearly and let you stay anyway. And when the stars got too quiet, he'd whisper stories of space-time mishaps and protein wedges, of memory crystals and sarcastic royalty, of a man who was mocked by a princess, until she learned he was family, and he laughed, because he'd survived all that, and he had more to live. The end.